In the bustling city of Lagos, Cynthia Okonkwo lived in a modest flat in Yaba, surrounded by the sounds of generators humming and street vendors calling out their wares. Her mother, Mama Chioma, had been the backbone of their small family, a woman whose laughter could fill entire rooms and whose wisdom seemed endless. When Mama Chioma collapsed one Tuesday afternoon at the market, clutching her chest, Cynthia's world shattered like dropped glass. The funeral drew hundreds, testament to her mother's generous spirit. Cynthia moved through those days in a fog, accepting condolences from relatives she barely recognized, their Igbo words of comfort washing over her like distant waves. Her job at the telecommunications company reduced her hours shortly after, citing budget cuts. The apartment felt cavernous without her mother's presence, every corner holding memories that now brought only pain. Cynthia found herself eating less, sleeping irregularly, and avoiding the living room where Mama Chioma's favorite chair sat empty. It was during this dark period that Lena Adiemi reappeared in her life. Lena and Cynthia had been friends since their university days at the University of Lagos, bonding over shared classes and dreams of successful careers. They drifted apart after graduation as life pulled them in different directions. Lena toward entrepreneurship, Cynthia toward corporate stability. When Lena showed up at Cynthia's door with a worn suitcase and tear-stained cheeks, claiming her own life had fallen apart, Cynthia didn't hesitate. "My relationship ended badly," Lena explained, her voice breaking. "I have nowhere else to go." Cynthia embraced her immediately, grateful for the familiar comfort of an old friend. "Stay as long as you need," Cynthia insisted, clearing out the guest room that had been her mother's sewing space. Lena seemed genuinely grateful, helping with cooking, cleaning, and keeping Cynthia company during the long, grief-filled nights. They fell into an easy rhythm, watching Nollywood films together, preparing jollof rice and egusi soup, and sharing stories about their mothers. For the first time since Mama Chioma's death, Cynthia felt less alone. The inconsistencies started small, so subtle that Cynthia almost missed them. A letter from her bank arrived opened, the seal clearly broken. When she mentioned it to Lena, her friend frowned thought-etically. "The postal service here is terrible," Lena said. "You know how things are." Cynthia nodded, accepting the explanation. Then her mobile banking app began logging her out randomly, requiring her to reset her password 3 times in 1 week. "Strange," she muttered, showing Lena the screen. "It's probably a glitch," Lena suggested smoothly. "These apps are always having issues. Remember when MTN's system crashed last month?" Cynthia agreed, though something felt off. Her mother's gold earrings, kept in a jewelry box on her dresser, seemed to have shifted position. Bills she distinctly remembered paying, NEPA, water, her building service charge, arrived with late payment notices. Each time Cynthia questioned these events, Lena was there with reasonable explanations, gentle reassurances, and concerned expressions that made Cynthia doubt her own perception. "You're grieving, Cynthia," Lena said softly one evening, as they sat on the balcony watching Lagos traffic crawl below. "Grief does strange things to memory. My aunt forgot entire conversations after my uncle passed." Cynthia wanted to believe her. Grief had certainly affected her. She'd forgotten appointments, missed calls, lost track of days. Why not these other things? Yet something gnawed at her, a small voice whispering that these weren't normal memory lapses. She pushed the feeling down, ashamed of doubting Lena's kindness. After all, who else had stayed by her side through these difficult months? Her relatives had returned to their own lives after the funeral. Her work colleagues sent polite messages, but maintained professional distance. Lena was her anchor, the one person who seemed to genuinely care. Cynthia decided to trust her friend completely, to surrender her doubts to the larger truth of Lena's loyalty. This decision, she would later realize, was exactly what Lena had been counting on. 6 months into Lena's stay, Cynthia's phone died during an important work call. She'd been negotiating a contract with a client in Abuja, and the sudden disconnection left her frustrated and embarrassed. Her charger wasn't in its usual spot by her bedside. She checked the living room, the kitchen, even the bathroom, growing increasingly annoyed. Finally, she remembered lending it to Lena the previous night. The guest room door was slightly ajar, and Cynthia could see the light was on. She approached, intending to knock, when she heard voices, Lena's voice and someone else's. Male, speaking in hushed tones. Cynthia froze mid-step. Something about the secretive quality of the conversation made her pause. She knew she shouldn't listen, that eavesdropping violated the trust between them. But her feet wouldn't move. The male voice asked a question she couldn't quite hear, and then Lena laughed, a sound that made Cynthia's skin prickle with unfamiliar unease. She still has no idea, Lena whispered, her voice carrying a note of smug satisfaction. Cynthia's heart stopped. The words hung in the air like poison. She pressed herself against the hallway wall, her breathing shallow, her mind racing. Who were they discussing? The rational part of her brain suggested it could be anyone. A mutual friend, a relative, someone from Lena's past. But her instincts screamed otherwise. What if she finds out? The male voice asked nervously. There was a pause and then Lena's soft, chilling laugh. She won't. She trusts me. She always has. The words struck Cynthia like a physical blow. They were talking about her friend, her supposed protector, her companion through the darkest period of her life, was discussing her with contempt, with certainty that Cynthia was too naive to discover whatever secret they were keeping. Cynthia's hands trembled. Every instinct urged her to burst into the room, to confront them immediately, to demand explanations. But something held her back. Cynthia remained frozen in the hallway, her ear pressed close to the wall. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared they might hear it through the door. The male voice spoke again, clearer now. I still think this is risky, Lena. What if someone notices? Who would notice? Lena replied dismissively. She's barely functioning. Half the time she can't remember what day it is. Grief is the perfect cover. Cynthia felt bile rise in her throat. They weren't just discussing her. They were exploiting her grief, using her mother's death as camouflage for something terrible. I already moved the money, Lena continued, her voice businesslike now. She won't check. She never does. Money? What money? Cynthia's mind spun through possibilities. Her salary account? Her mother's small savings? The insurance payout from Mama Chioma's life policy? The male voice asked, and the lease? Handled, Lena said with evident pride. Everything's in my name now. By the time she realizes, it'll be too late. The world tilted beneath Cynthia's feet. Cynthia stumbled backward from the wall, her vision blurring with tears. The lease, her apartment, the home her mother had helped her secure, where Mama Chioma had spent her final months, filled with memories and love, was being stolen from her. How? When had Lena managed this? Cynthia thought back over the past months, searching for clues, the open mail, the documents Lena had helpfully offered to file for her. You have enough to worry about, Lena had said kindly. Let me handle the paperwork. Cynthia had been grateful then, seeing it as friendship. Now she saw it for what it was, calculated theft. Her legs shook as she walked back to her bedroom, moving silently down the familiar hallway that suddenly felt alien and dangerous. She locked her door, something she'd never done before, and sat on her bed, her whole body trembling. The urge to scream, to cry, to confront Lena immediately was overwhelming. Cynthia's next stop was a cyber cafe far from her neighborhood, where she could research without risk of Lena monitoring her home computer. She discovered that several of the unauthorized transactions led to an account in Lena's name. More damning, she found email exchanges between Lena and someone named Tunde, the male voice from that night, discussing their investment in Cynthia's situation. The emails were shockingly detailed, outlining how they had gradually gained access to her accounts, forged her signatures, and manipulated her grief-clouded state. She's so trusting it's almost too easy, Lena had written. Reading those words felt like being stabbed repeatedly, but Cynthia saved everything. She also installed a call recording app on her phone, making sure to check Nigeria's recording laws. One-party consent meant she could legally record conversations she was part of. Back home, she set up a small camera in the living room, disguised as a charging station, to capture any conversations Lena might have with Tunde when Cynthia was supposedly at work. Cynthia's days became an exhausting performance. At home, she remained the grieving, slightly confused woman Lena expected. At work and during her private investigations, she was sharp, focused, meticulous. The duality was wearing, but necessary. She began mentioning small memory improvements to Lena, testing the waters. I remembered to pay all my bills this month, she said casually one evening. Lena's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. That's good, she replied. Your memory must be returning. Yes, Cynthia agreed. I'm feeling more like myself. I think I'm ready to take back control of my finances, my documents. You've been so helpful, but I shouldn't burden you anymore. It's no burden, Lena said quickly. You're still healing. Don't rush yourself. But Cynthia noticed how Lena watched her more carefully after that, how she seemed nervous when Cynthia spent time on her laptop or made phone calls. The predator was sensing her prey might be awakening. Cynthia took a day off work, claiming illness, and visited a lawyer recommended by a colleague. Mrs. Adebayo's office in Ikea was modest but professional, filled with law books and framed certificates. Cynthia laid out everything, the documents, the recordings, the bank statements. Mrs. Adebayo listened intently, her expression growing graver. This is identity theft, fraud, forgery, she said finally. Criminal offenses. You have substantial evidence, but we'll need more to ensure prosecution. What else do I need? Cynthia asked. Direct evidence of her intent to defraud you. The recordings help, but if you can get her to discuss the plan explicitly, even better. Also, we should notify the police soon. Cynthia hesitated. I want to be absolutely certain before involving authorities. Can we wait a bit longer? Mrs. Adebayo nodded. 1 week, gather what you can. Then we proceed legally. Cynthia left feeling both empowered and terrified. The end was approaching, and there would be no turning back. That evening, Cynthia initiated her final gambit. She pretended to receive an upsetting phone call from her bank, making sure Lena could overhear. What do you mean there's a problem with my account? She said loudly into the phone. Identity verification? But I haven't made any large transactions. She hung up, looking distressed, and turned to Lena. The bank flagged my account for suspicious activity. They want me to come in tomorrow with identification and proof of address. Lena's face paled slightly. That's strange. What kind of activity? They wouldn't say over the phone. Something about unauthorized changes. Cynthia watched Lena's reaction carefully. Should I be worried? I'm sure it's just a security measure, Lena said, but her voice wavered. Banks are so paranoid these days. That night, Cynthia's hidden camera captured Lena making a frantic phone call to Tunda. She knows something, Lena hissed. The bank called. We need to move faster. The recording was perfect, clear, incriminating, undeniable. Cynthia spent the next days collecting the final pieces of her case. She obtained security footage from her bank showing Lena visiting and making changes to Cynthia's account, forging signatures. She retrieved her mother's jewelry from a pawn shop. Lena had sold it weeks ago, and the shop's records showed Lena's identification. She contacted Cynthia's insurance company and discovered that Lena had attempted to redirect the beneficiary payment from Mama Shioma's policy. Each discovery was a fresh wound, but Cynthia channeled her pain into determination. She also learned that Tunde was Lena's boyfriend, a small-time fraudster with previous arrests for similar schemes. They'd apparently done this before, targeting vulnerable women and exploiting their trust. Cynthia was simply their latest victim, or would have been if she hadn't overheard that conversation. Mrs. Adebayo reviewed the new evidence with satisfaction. This is more than enough, she confirmed. We can proceed. Cynthia nodded, her jaw set with resolve. Let's do it. Mrs. Adebayo worked with the police to coordinate Lena's arrest. They would come to the apartment on a Thursday afternoon when both women would typically be home. Cynthia went through that morning in a daze, knowing these were the final hours of the elaborate pretense she'd maintained for weeks. At breakfast, she studied Lena's face, the familiar features of someone she'd once considered a sister, now revealed as a calculating stranger. Are you okay? Lena asked, noticing Cynthia's distraction. You seem quiet. Just thinking about my mother, Cynthia replied, which was true. She was thinking about Mama Kioma's wisdom, her warnings about trusting too easily, her strength in adversity. I miss her so much. Lena reached across the table, squeezing Cynthia's hand with apparent sympathy. The gesture made Cynthia's skin crawl. How many times had Lena offered comfort while simultaneously stealing from her? How many kind words had masked cruel intentions? Cynthia pulled her hand away gently, making it seem natural. Soon, very soon, the charade would end. The police arrived at 2 p.m., accompanied by Mrs. Adebayo. Cynthia had been warned, but Lena's shock was genuine and satisfying. "What's happening?" Lena demanded as officers entered the apartment. "Lena Adeyemi, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and forgery," the lead officer stated formally. "Tunda Bakare is already in custody." Lena's face drained of color. She turned to Cynthia, her expression shifting from shock to desperate appeal. "Cynthia, there's been some mistake. Tell them." "I know everything," Cynthia said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "I heard you that night, 3 weeks ago. I've been documenting everything since then." Lena's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Then her expression transformed into something ugly. Rage, contempt, a mask finally dropped. "You were supposed to be broken," she hissed as the officers secured her hands. "Too stupid and grief-stricken to notice anything." Cynthia met her eyes with a calm she didn't entirely feel. "You mistook my grief for weakness? That was your mistake." After the police left with Lena, Cynthia sat in her suddenly quiet apartment and wept. Not tears of sadness, but of release, a flood of emotion she'd held back for weeks. Mrs. Adebayo stayed, making tea and offering silent support. "You were very brave," the lawyer said gently. "Thank you," Cynthia whispered. "I couldn't have done this without your help." The legal process, Mrs. Adebayo explained, would take time. There would be court appearances, testimonies, paperwork. Cynthia would need to formally reclaim her lease, reverse the fraudulent transactions, and secure her accounts. The insurance company had already frozen the claim pending investigation. It would be exhausting, but Cynthia felt ready. That evening, she called her Aunt Ngozi, her mother's sister, and explained everything. Aunt Ngozi arrived within hours, embracing Cynthia tightly. "Your mother would be so proud," she said. "You have her strength." For the first time since Mama Chioma's death, Cynthia felt truly connected to her mother's memory, not through grief, but through the resilience she'd inherited. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and personal recovery. Mr. Okafor, horrified to learn how his trust had been exploited, immediately voided the fraudulent lease and restored Cynthia's tenancy. The bank reversed the unauthorized transactions after reviewing Cynthia's evidence. Her insurance claim was processed properly, providing financial stability. Tunde and Lena's trial moved forward quickly given the overwhelming evidence. Mrs. Adebayo kept Cynthia informed of every development. Lena attempted to claim she'd been manipulated by Tunde, but the emails and recordings told a different story. Both faced significant prison sentences. Cynthia attended one court session, wanting to see justice done. When Lena was led into the courtroom, she looked diminished, defeated. Their eyes met briefly, and Cynthia felt neither satisfaction nor pity, only a kind of closure. She left before the proceedings ended, realizing she didn't need to witness the final verdict. Her victory wasn't about Lena's punishment. It was about her own survival and strength. Cynthia began therapy, something she should have done after her mother's death. Dr. Folick, her counselor, helped her process both the grief she'd been avoiding and the trauma of Lena's betrayal. "You experienced two profound losses," Dr. Folick explained. "Your mother's death and the death of a friendship you thought was real. Both deserve to be mourned." Through therapy, Cynthia learned that her trust hadn't been weakness. Lena's betrayal had been the problem, not Cynthia's openness to friendship. She also learned to recognize the warning signs she'd missed, not to blame herself, but to be wiser going forward. Slowly, she began to reclaim her apartment, transforming the guest room into a home office. She removed all traces of Lena's presence, not out of bitterness, but as an act of renewal. She cooked her mother's recipes, filling the space with familiar aromas. She invited Aunt Ngozi and cousins over, filling the rooms with laughter again. The apartment began to feel like home once more. 3 months after Lena's arrest, Cynthia received a message from an unknown number. "My name is Adaizi. I think my friend is doing something similar to what you went through. I found your story online in a victim support forum. What should I do?" Cynthia stared at the message for a long time. She'd posted anonymously in the forum, sharing her experience to help others, never expecting direct contact. But here was someone reaching out. afraid and uncertain, just as Cynthia had been. She thought about ignoring it, about maintaining her privacy and distance. But then she thought about her mother, about the strength she'd discovered, about the responsibility that came with surviving what she'd endured. She began typing slowly, carefully. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Don't wait for permission to protect yourself. She paused, then added more. Practical advice about lawyers, evidence collection, support systems. She shared Mrs. Adebayo's contact information with permission. When Adai's replied with grateful thanks, Cynthia felt something shift inside her. That message opened a door Cynthia hadn't known existed. She began volunteering at a women's support organization in Lagos, helping others who'd experienced fraud or exploitation. Her story resonated with many. Women who'd been targeted during vulnerable moments, who'd trusted the wrong people, who'd thought they were alone in their experiences. Cynthia discovered she was a natural advocate, her own trauma transforming into empathy and practical wisdom. She learned about the systemic issues that enabled fraud, lack of financial literacy, social pressure to trust family and friends unconditionally, insufficient legal protections. She began speaking at community events, sharing her story not for sympathy, but to educate and empower others. You are not stupid for trusting, she told audiences. You are human. The people who exploit that trust are the ones at fault. Her work gave her purpose beyond simple survival. She was no longer just a victim who'd escaped. She was someone actively preventing others from experiencing similar pain. 1 year after her mother's death, Cynthia stood at Mama Chioma's grave in Ikoyi Cemetery. She placed fresh flowers and sat on the grass, speaking to her mother as she often did. I understand now what you tried to teach me, she said softly, about strength, about wisdom, about knowing who deserves our trust. She thought about the journey she traveled, from crushing grief to betrayal, to empowerment. The pain hadn't disappeared. She still missed her mother daily, still felt the sting of Lena's deception. But these wounds had made her stronger, more aware, more compassionate toward others suffering similar struggles. Her phone buzzed, another message from Adiz, thanking her for the support that had helped her escape her own dangerous situation. Cynthia smiled. The quiet around her no longer felt empty or frightening. It felt peaceful, full of possibility. She had lost her mother. She had lost a friend she'd thought was real. But in the process, she had found herself resilient, capable, worthy of better. And that, Cynthia realized, was its own kind of homecoming.